What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G. Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network. Today we're talking the latest episode of WWE Photo Shoot, featuring Captain Charisma himself, Christian. This aired after Raw this past Monday night. A great episode, about 24-25 minutes in length. Well worth the watch. Obviously, being the big Christian fan that I am, I would say that. But a lot of great information here, a lot of awesome stories from Christian. He has an awesome memory, and he remembers every single one of these photos, if not most of them. But yeah, this was a very good episode. So the first picture that we see here is of Christian's very first look. When he came to WWE in 1998 with the long hair, the glasses, he said that he looked very serious at that time, and that was at the very start of his career in WWE. He said at that point he didn't have much experience, but he kind of got his comfort level first before getting that opportunity to break out a little later on. So kind of finding his footing, becoming more comfortable was more important before getting that opportunity to break out, a little while later. We see a picture of the Brood, and Christian says they left a lasting impression on the WWE Universe because of the ring of fire they rose to the stage with during their entrance. And he said people always got excited whenever they heard the breathing at the beginning of their entrance music. And that music, he says, was unbelievable. He said it matched their personas to a T, and he said it was still, although he's biased, one of the best entrances in the history of WWE. And honestly, it's hard to argue with that. The Brood's impact, it did kind of pave the way to superstardom for Edge and Christian. The actual faction wasn't really anything special before they disbanded in 1999, but the theme song, the entrance alone, still stands to this day over 20 years later as one of the greatest entrances of all time, hands down, no doubt. We see a picture of the first ladder match that Edge and Christian had with the Hardys at No Mercy 1999, almost exactly 20 years ago next month. I think it was October 17th, so we're quickly coming up on the 20th anniversary of that match, which is crazy. He said that match was all about seizing opportunity, and they did that. And I think Matt Hardy said, Christian says, that that match took them from being WWE wrestlers to being WWE superstars, and that both teams received a standing ovation the next night on Raw, and that it changed the trajectory of their careers. And Christian said he often thinks about how, if that match didn't happen, where would they be today? And I would honestly say that if that feud didn't happen, tag team wrestling would have never been the same, and at least not on the, would not have reached the heights that it did during that point in time during the Attitude Era. And I don't know if Edge, Christian, and even Matt and Jeff would have been the same wrestlers and the legends they are today. We see a picture of them winning the tag team championships at WrestleMania 2000, that being Edge and Christian. He said this was a big night and that it was their first tag team title victory, which I didn't know. I knew they won the tag titles that night. I didn't know that was their first reign as tag team champions, but I guess it was according to Christian. He actually said he didn't know if they would ever win those tag team titles because there was talk before WrestleMania of splitting up Edge and Christian, but because their personalities started to come out, things changed for them. And then, then their careers took off from there. Christian actually admitted that he couldn't stand up on the ladder when they won the tag team titles. There's this great shot of the table, and they're standing there. Edge is standing up on the table with the tag team title, and Christian is kind of wobbling on the table. And he said half of the ladder, I think, the leg of the ladder broke, so he feared that if he stood up on the table on top of the ladder, he would have fell over in the second row of the audience or some shit like that. And that moment, he says, would have looked very different. He also says that he wanted nothing more in his life than for Howard Finkel to announce him as the winner at WrestleMania as the new tag team champion. So he told Howard Finkel after the show about that, and he ended up tearing up, which was really cool. That meant a lot to Howard Finkel, who is one of the nicest guys you will ever meet. I actually met Howard Finkel and Christian at the exact same convention 2 years ago, Rhode Island Comic-Con, and they could not have been nicer. We see a picture of Edge and Christian as Los Conquistadores. He says that was when they, lost that match to the Hardys that would disqualify them from ever going to the tag team for, ever contending for the tag team titles again while the Hardys were in possession of them. So they dressed up as the Conquistadors to beat Matt and Jeff for the tag team titles. And then Matt and Jeff did the exact same thing a short time later. He says they bought the masks at Hot Topic, which I didn't know was around back in '99, but I guess it was. He said that you could smell the paint fumes because he bought the masks, I guess, at Hot Topic, and then he painted them gold, and you could smell the paint fumes from inside the mask, which is no fun. He then talks about Commissioner Foley, Mick Foley, who he had a love-hate relationship, he says. They had a love-hate relationship, him and Edge, during 2000. But they got each other. Mick Foley got what Edge and Christian were going for, and then Edge and Christian got, the comedic timing that Mick Foley had at that point. And they had a lot of fun together throughout the year 2000. The next picture we see is of Edge and Christian doing a photo shoot, and Christian admits that he reveals that he actually always used to point to Edge during those early photo shoots, and that was like his shtick. And a fun story here, he said that he used to take a lot of last rides from The Undertaker in like 2000. So, like during the tag team matches, I guess, that he would have either with Taker and Kane, maybe, or Taker and someone else, and then Edge and Christian. He would always be the one to take that last ride in all the shows, the house shows, everything. So, Edge went out as a make good for Christian being the one to always sacrifice his body for this move, for the match. Edge went out and bought them sunglasses, so he paid for that for Christian, which was cool. And I think it was the same glasses he was wearing in that photo shoot, which is why he told that story. They then talk about, or rather Christian then talks about the 5-second pose and how originally when they were baby faces, they went through the crowd like Roman Reigns used to. But when they were heels, they didn't want to do that because they didn't want people touching them. So they were generous enough to present people with the 5-second pose to give them enough time to take a picture of them before they went on and did their thing. So it stuck. Then they started integrating things from different towns into the shtick, and it stuck, and people still do it and know of it today, 20 years later. He then talks about the Jug Band, him, Edge, and Kurt Angle, and he talks about how he had a lot of fun with Kurt Angle back in the day and how he really put it out there. He put it all out there doing the comedy stuff because he knew that Edge and himself could back it up in the ring. They were great in the ring, which is what kind of made up for all the comedy stuff. They can make an ass of themselves during the comedy things, but when the bell rang, they can go out there and prove they were better than anyone. We then see a picture of him turning on Edge in Toronto back in 2001. Christian talks about how it was right after Edge won King of the Ring. He got jealous and then took matters into his own hands. He said that he had legit tears leaving the ring that night because he knew it was the end of his tag team with Edge. But he called it a transition period. But he was, excited to find his own footing as a singles wrestler, and it took some time. And he looked himself in the mirror one day, not knowing if he could do it. And he said, listen, if you don't do this, just pack your bags up and go home. Because you're either a singles guy or you're not going to be here. And he ended up having to do it. We see a picture of him winning the Intercontinental Championship back at Judgment Day 2003. He won it right after it was reinstated. I think the championship was deactivated after Triple H won it from Kane, I think at No Mercy 02, and then it was deactivated after that. He said he always thought it was a cool title and how it was the stepping stone essentially to a bigger and better things, the World Championship in WWE. So he dumped Booker T out of the ring to win it, and he said that was a big night for him. He dumped Booker T out of the Battle Royal to win the championship, I should say, and he said that was a big night for him as well. We then hear him talk about Vitamin C, the tag team with Chris Jericho from 2003-2004. He said that was another turning point for him, to getting to tag with someone the caliber of Chris Jericho, a former WWE Undisputed Champion. He said he actually moved to Florida and didn't realize until a little later on that he was 3 doors down from Chris Jericho. They were basically neighbors. So they went on the road together, and it kind of made it easier for them to translate what they were doing outside of the ring in real life to what they were doing on TV because they had that natural chemistry. He then talks about the ass cream bit on Raw when him and Chris Jericho had their towels stolen from them after the Dudley Boys stole their clothes. He said, it was kind of liberating, I'm not going to lie. That's what Christian said about the segment, which was funny. He said that anything they had to do with comedy, you just had to jump in with both feet. And doing this type of stuff, he said, never really bothered him because he never really minded being the butt of a joke. Because, like I said earlier, he knew his in-ring work would always legitimize him because he was that good in the ring. He then talks about the Battle of the Sexes storyline from 2003, 2004, I think it was, when he and Chris Jericho made a bet over a Canadian dollar of all things over who could get with their woman the first. I think it was Christian had Lita, and then Chris Jericho had Trish Stratus. And then the whole shot here is of Trish and Lita finding out about the bet. They didn't take it too well. I guess they didn't think they were sincere with their apology, Christian said. Christian then talks about the hand over his face, taunt that he does, where he kind of looks out into the crowd and people would always ask him, what is the significance of that? And he said that he was always looking for peeps. And it started as a backstage gag where he would call people backstage peeps. And he used it in a promo one time. And then the very next week, someone had brought a sign with it to Raw that said, well, we're Christian's peeps. And that was when it turned into a thing every week on Raw. And now, again, he still uses it to this day whenever he comes back. We see a picture of him with Tyson Tomko having the Sea gear back from 2005. He said that Tyson Tomko had his best interest in mind, and Tomko was still learning the ropes around that time, but he had his back. He had Christian's back, and they got along really well, and they had a good thing going back in 2005. He then talks about the origins of the Peep Show, and I guess I didn't know this, but he actually took over an episode of the highlight reel from Chris Jericho in an episode of Raw because Jericho got run off from the ring or something like that. So Christian took it over and called it the Peep Show, and it became a regular, recurring, segment, talk show segment on the show from that point forward. So he turned it into his own, and then he got to feel out the live crowd throughout these talk shows, and it's a lot harder than it looks, Christian says. But he said the Peep Show was instrumental in him becoming more comfortable in his heel character and getting a platform to kind of showcase his skills on the microphone. And he still does it to this day whenever he comes back. I know he did it back at Raw 25 with Seth Rollins and Jason Jordan. I'm not sure if he's done it since then, but he has done a few episodes, a few installments of the Peep Show in the last couple of years. And he said he didn't know if it would stick with him. Obviously, when he did it back in 2003, 2004, he didn't know that it would become what it is today. And obviously, it's become this recurring segment on Raw and on SmackDown, and people still remember it to this very day, over a decade and a half later. A very interesting picture they show here of Christian in TNA. He actually talks about his time in TNA, which at one point would be fucking a dirty word in WWE. And granted, aside from that one instance about a year and a half ago, they never say it on WWE TV. They never mention Impact or TNA, whatever, as they really don't really need to. But they talk about it all the time in these WWE Network shows. They've talked about it in documentaries. They've talked about it in 24. They've talked about it on Table for Three, on Ride Along, now on Photo Shoot. And they've done it on Photo Shoot before, but it was still interesting to hear Christian talk about his time at TNA. He talked about how he left WWE in 2005, and he outright said, I went from WWE to a smaller platform, which he's not lying. He's not wrong. TNA was absolutely and still is a much smaller platform than WWE. But he did praise TNA because he said he couldn't be Captain Charisma over there, so he started calling himself the Instant Classic. But he said it was essentially the same persona. But again, he praised TNA because he said it was a very important time for him. He didn't poop on it. He said he grew while he was there, and he showed while he was in TNA that he could wrestle in the main event. He was a main event caliber performer. And he said his goal was always to go back to WWE and wanted to step it up while there at a higher level. We then see a picture of him winning the NWA Championship while in TNA, the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship. Called it a huge night. He said that it made him think about the lineage that championship had, having been won by Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, Harley Race. The list goes on and on and on. He said that he gained real confidence from winning that championship, that he could compete again on a main event level. We then see a picture of him with Jack Swagger upon his return to WWE in 2009 on the ECW brand. I remember there was a lot of, maybe not discomfort, but, skepticism over Christian going to ECW over, SmackDown or Raw or one of the main shows. But he said that he was very excited, actually, to step into ECW because he wanted to work with the fresh talent, and he knew, because it was a smaller show, a lot like TNA, he knew that he would always be featured, and he knew that he would have time every single week to put on great matches. And that's exactly what he did. He had great matches with Jack Swagger, he said, William Regal, Zack Ryder, and a few others he didn't mention, Ezekiel Jackson, Yoshitatsu, and a few others throughout the remainder of 2009 going into 2010. He said he had a lot of fun in ECW and that it was his first step in coming back was to win the ECW championship, and that's what he did his first night back. Didn't win the championship that night, but confronting then champion Jack Swagger was his first step in claiming the gold, which he would end up doing 2 months later at Backlash. We then see a picture of him with Heath Slater from the very first season of NXT when it was still a competition show. They were filming something in the gym, and I guess Christian played a rib on, he ribbed Heath Slater by putting the workout set that he was on super heavy. So Heath Slater had to talk to him for this segment while struggling to lift the weights. But he said he was a good dude, and that it's cool to see him go on to success in the WWE as a former, tag team champion, multi-time tag team champion, doing all the other cool things that he's done in WWE. We see a shot of him winning the World Heavyweight Championship back from Extreme Rules 2011, and he called it a surreal moment to climb that ladder and pull down that championship. That event emanated from Tampa, which is basically his second hometown because that's where he lives. And he said that Edge was there too, and that Edge was probably more emotional than he was when he won the championship. But he called it a very emotional night, and he said that he always believed in himself. He thought, there was a few people that never get to be world champion. but he always believed in his abilities, and he felt fortunate because some people never get that moment, and he called it a very big night in his career. He didn't say it here, but I did hear him talk about this on another panel with Randy Orton, Kathy Kelly, and The Miz a few weeks ago, about how he has actually yet to watch back that match because he has such a great memory of that match in his mind from being there and doing the match that he doesn't want to tarnish it by watching it back, which I thought was interesting, and I completely get too. We then see a picture of him with Randy Orton during their series of matches in the summer of 2011, and he said, again, he wanted that opportunity to prove that he was a main eventer. And the chemistry that they had was undeniable, he said. He said they took each other to each other's game, or to another, they took each other's game to another level. There we go. And he said that although it was the summer of Punk, Cena and Punk could not come close to touching what Christian and Orton were doing in the ring at that point in time that summer. And honestly, I kind of agree. Punk and Cena had one of my favorite matches of all time at Money in the Bank 2011. But Christian and Orton that same summer, which is why it's one of my favorite summers as a WWE fan, they were killing it over on the SmackDown brand over the World Heavyweight Championship. Their matches at Over the Limit and on SmackDown, SummerSlam, Capital Punishment, Money in the Bank. They had like 5 or 6 matches, and they were all fantastic. And more consistently, I thought they were the better matches than what Punk and Cena were doing. The only real reason why the Summer of Punk is as regarded as it is, and it was amazing, don't get me wrong, but in the ring was because of that Money in the Bank ladder match. Although, as good as Punk and Cena was at SummerSlam that year, Orton and Christian were really the ones who stole the show that year at SummerSlam in that no-holds-barred match for the World Heavyweight Championship. But he said their styles meshed really, really well. They always brought the best out of each other, and he wanted to make people believe that something was going to happen, that he could beat Randy Orton, always really keep people, on their toes, suspending that disbelief, and take them along for the ride, and they did that. We see a picture of him making an entrance at a live event, and he says that it's probably the first night of the tour because his shirt was still very much ironed and clean and ready to go. He speculates that because he was holding up the one finger, that it was around the one more match era, even though he wasn't wearing that shirt at this point in time. I think it was sooner than that, but he thinks because he's holding up his index finger, he thinks it's the one more match era, even though I don't know that it was. But anyway, might have been around 2011, 2012. I might be wrong, but anyway, he said that, it was around that time when he was begging for one more match for the World Heavyweight Championship against Randy Orton, and he did this for several years, and he thought that if his character believed it, then everyone else would believe it too. We then see a picture of him on a pre-show panel, I think at Battleground 2014. He always thought that he had more to offer than just whatever he was doing inside the ring, and there's so many more opportunities now within WWE to be involved without actually wrestling, which leads us to our very last picture of the Edge and Christian show, the Edge and Christian show Season 2, where they filmed something in Connecticut. I remember this episode. They were, I think it was on the Season 2 finale, or the Season 2 premiere, the very first episode of Season 2, when they did a mock of the Goonies, and they filmed it with Edge, Christian himself, Sean Moody, Funaki, and Tommy Dreamer, and it was a great episode. He said it was a lot of fun, and their only real goal with that show is to go out and have fun with their friends and the superstars, and they did that. He smiled, he said, every day doing that show, and he said, we had no business having that much fun and getting paid for it, so don't tell anybody, which that was a great way to end it, but yeah, that was it for WWE Photo Shoot with Captain Charisma Christian. Awesome episode. I'm a big Christian guy, like I said, but even if you're not, I still think you'll enjoy this episode, this installment of WWE Photo Shoot. The show never ceases to deliver and, offer some very interesting, entertaining, and exciting stories, and this episode had plenty of it. So check it out on the WWE Network at your leisure. It did air after all this past week on the WWE Network. So until next time, guys, no more Ms. and Mrs., no more straight up Steve Austin. Those reviews are done. So if you want to check out my reviews of the entire Seasons 1, both of the first seasons of Straight Up Steve Austin and Ms. and Mrs., they're right here on the channel on WWE Network and Chill. And I will be back next week here on Network and Chill to review the very first episode in Season, 9 of Total Divas. It's airing after, I think at 10 p.m. after NXT and AEW next Wednesday. So very much excited for that. It should be awesome. And I will be reviewing Total Divas probably that Friday or Saturday for the Season 9 premiere. Until then, guys, be sure to like this video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more content. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch you guys down the road.